Coming to the third annual Slow Living Summit. My name is Orly Munzing, and I am the Executive Director and founder of Strolling and Heifers and the Slow Living Summit. So I'd like to start out with the theme question that we have for the Slow Living this year. And it's, what can you learn in the slow lane that you can't learn in the fast lane? In the fast lane, from our government to our large and small communities, we've been taught that extracting or taking things is the right things to do. Slow living, to me, is simply about living mindfully. It is a personal transformation that requires us to slow down in our approach to ourselves by giving back to our community and our personal lifestyle. Once you're able to achieve that, you feel healthier and satisfied with who you are in this journey of life. For me, it's a huge shift, and I work on this each day, and I catch myself, and I slow my thoughts down to a mindful and caring mode. Believe me, it's hard work. Slow living is for all people. It's for people who live in rural areas, small towns, and large cities. For people who are young, old, wealthy, and struggling. And we're all seeking a better way, a saner way, and a happier way, a way to live and organize our lives. Therefore, I hope that you enjoy and experience the third annual Slow Living Summit, and you take away much learning from our amazing roster of speakers and presenters, as well as from each other. I want to express my sincere appreciation for all the summit organizers, and especially to Martin Langeveld, who is coordinating this year's summit, and he's also the Strolling of the Heifers and Slow Living Summit Marketing Director. Martin, where are you? Could you please stand up? And he has to put up with me. I also would like to thank the many, many volunteers, sponsors, speakers, and presenters for helping to make this event possible. And please note that all the speakers and volunteers volunteer their time. It's amazing. It simply could not happen without so many generous donations of time, energy, funding, and in-kind supplies and services from various people throughout the state. I also especially want to thank our presenting Strolling of the Heifer and Slow Living Summit presenting sponsor, which is Merchants Bank. And their banner is right there. Thank you so much, Merchants Bank. And also the other Slow Living Summit sponsors, such as AgroLiving, Crop Organic Vodka, and Farmers Gin that you just had a chance to taste tonight, the Sandy River Charitable Foundation, the Lydia B. Stokes Foundation, Green Mountain Coffee Roasters, Marlborough College and World Learning, who, with their support, we could not do this. They provide us tremendous amount of counseling, help us find speakers, as well as Marlborough College opening their doors to us so generously with the conference. I also want to thank Global Roundtable Leadership, Vermont Tech, Solidago Foundation, and the many, many other amazing sponsors whose logo appear in your program book and you've seen appear on the stage on the screen here. So we invite everyone to stay after the summit for the lighter and whimsical side of the Strolling of the Heifers. The Strolling of the Heifer Parade and Festival will begin Friday when the conference is over. The doors will open. The street will be closed, and it will be an amazing agricultural Mardi Gras with vendors and music and and kids and sampling of food, and of course our Governor Shumlin acting as the DJ, announcing our quiche winners. He's amazing, and he has a great whimsical humor. There's a full schedule in your program that you have received when you registered, and I really ask you to look at it and enjoy it. And also, we would like your feedback. So after the event, look in your inbox and give us your ideas, because we're going to send you an opportunity to respond to how this Slow Living Summit went. So please enjoy the summit, listen, learn, make valuable connections, contribute your thoughts, work on your own inner transformations, and share slow living back in your community and your network of friends. So it gives me great pleasure and honor to introduce to you Lori Hanau, who will be acting as the Slow Living Summit Plenary Session MC. Lori lives in Keene, New Hampshire, where she founded her company, Global Roundtable Leadership, and with her team, she advises and supports individual, businesses, and organizations in developing next-generation leadership and healthy cultures of collaboration and equality. This work combines Lori's practical business experience with her heart-centered values and strong inner compass. This allows her to inspire, guide, and motivate people to rise to the best of themselves. And through her work, Lori infuses well-being, wisdom, and the intersection of the individual, the group, the whole system of which we are all part of. Lori is also a faculty partner in the MBA program at Marlborough Grad Center. So, Lori Hanau, our MC for the next 2.5 days.
So welcome, everybody. I am so excited to be the MC for this year's third Slow Living Summit. And I want to begin with a 6-part invitation to support our collective and individual Slow Living Summit experience. Number 1, I hope you realize how much your presence matters. So often we feel the insignificance of our lives, and I hope we can hold together the paradox of our insignificance and our significance, and that we all realize together and work together to have this experience be not just something that's happening up here, you know, or at the different workshops, but the container is here. It's all of us together. And that the quality of how we show up individually has a direct impact on our collective experience. And so I hope that you arrive well and authentically, and that you are kind to yourselves. 2, I hope you see this space and time together as an opportunity, inviting us to step out of not just relating through our roles, but we shift into a deeper connection of who we fully are in our wholeness. 3, I invite us to practice openness and to the extent with which we have open minds and open hearts, supports our experience and collective experience on the outside, and it also supports the muscle building of our curiosity, our humility, our healthy growth, our empathy, and us just having a plain old good time. 4, I invite you to allow yourselves to be uncomfortable. I have never known any act of inner or outer transformation that does not include stages of great discomfort. And so when you're feeling restless, If there's something that you're not liking about what's happening on stage, if you're unexpectedly irritated, I hope that you greet and fully face these feelings, and that then the artistry is what we do with them, and how we deal with them with ourselves, and how we treat each other. But I invite us to not turn away from being uncomfortable. 5, which relates to 4 and 3 for sure, is that we relate to this time together as a practice. That we practice slowing down from the inside out. That we practice being present. That we practice really seeing each other, feeling each other's presence, greeting each other with good regard. And that we practice not only listening to receive information in our heads and in our hearts, but we realize our nervous systems, our physical bodies, and again, that we really practice being embodied and modeling this presence, that we use this time as a practice for exercising these interior, intangible muscles of wisdom and intelligence. And 6 is celebration. I just really encourage us to be in our joy, to have fun, and to support each other's wellness and vibrancy. And so part of my MC role is introducing the speakers and going over the details of each day. And it's also being responsible for the quality of the energy and flow of the whole summit, and the coming and going from the plenary experiences. And that one may be a bit of a challenge. And so I'm wondering if I could have volunteers, by a show of hands, for anyone else who's willing to support the quality of our flow and rhythm here at the summit, both at all the different breakouts and coming back here to the plenaries. And so may I see anyone else who will help me and be a support in supporting the quality of the flow? All right. Thank you so much. So we are Team Flow. And what this will mean is that as it gets close to time when we're supposed to sit, come back and sit, that we will honor that we will be awake, that we won't wait until we're urged 3 or 4 or 5 times, and that we will take the lead on that and be aware of that together. And then as we sit down, that we will consciously just really get into our bodies, maybe take a nice deep breath, and just be aware for how much, again, we are a part of setting the tone for the whole experience. Thank you so much. And then some of the different announcements is, first of all, I just want to have us be aware of the fact that we will be here for all plenary sessions, and there are 5 of them. 2 more tomorrow and 2 more on Friday. At the beginning of each plenary, we'll be having different types of tone-setting moments. And if you haven't done so already, I'm wondering if you could please turn off or put on silence your cell phones. I want to let you know that out in the lobby throughout the summit, there will be paper and markers where we can post our thoughts, impressions, and questions, and anything that we want to share, so that again, we're gathering the collective wisdom and intelligence of all of us here attending the summit. And I want to offer that, that you maybe consider 2 different inquiries. One is, what does slow living mean to you? And the second is, how do you practice? I think it could be really wonderful and interesting to see how we each practice and to share those practices collectively. And then choose whether you want to put your name, and contact information on there or not. But those papers are going to be out in the walls of the lobby, and I really encourage you to contribute your voice in that way. And then, let me see here, blogging. Are Tad or Stephen in the house yet?
I'm right here.
Okay, cool. And are you Stephen?
Yeah.
All right, wonderful. So Stephen, will you just stand up so we can all see you? So Tad Montgomery and Stephen Courage are the Summit's bloggers-in-chief. Thank you very, very much for that. And they have assembled a team of volunteers who are writing blog reports on the Slow Living Summit site about many of the sessions. If you're interested in joining that team by doing 1 or 2 or more blog reports, they kindly and generously invite you to join them at the Whetstone Brewery. Am I pronouncing that properly?
Yes.
I'm not sure.
Whetstone.
Thank you. Whetstone, which is across the street and then across the railroad tracks from here. Or just come to Steve after the plenary and speak with him. And then after the session, there's 2 more announcements. After the session, you can take in the evening session at the Marlborough Grad Center and The Beat Goes, the Sacred Heartbeat. This will be a Native American drumming, meditation, and movement workshop with a focus on healing, expression, dance with drum, rattle, and voice. Native American social dancers will also be shared, round dance, two-step, and snake dance. Please feel free to bring your own personal drum and rattle, as the community and group percussion circles will also be included in the workshop. And this will be led by Fidel Moreno. Fidel, are you here in the house at all yet? Okay, I know he's traveling to get here. And then tomorrow morning we will regather here. We'll have a continental breakfast starting at 8 a.m. in the lobby. And please be in your seats here just a little bit before 8:30 so we can start right at 8:30. And this session is called Reconnecting Farmers, Eaters, and Healthy Communities and features Francis Moore LaPay and Judy Wicks. So now for the tone setting. This summit is dedicated to the memory of Helen Daly and Keith Mellard, 2 precious individuals who were here at last year's summit and were a part of the summit's planning team, but who we have lost in the past year. Here to tell you about Helen and Keith are John Daly, Helen's husband, and Geraldine Wilson, a friend of Keith's. This dedication will also serve as the tone-setting moment. And I just want to personally add that I had dinner with John and Geraldine about 3 weeks ago. And I have just been so heartened, inspired, and enriched by our time together.
Hello. So, as Lori said, this year's Slow Living Summit is dedicated to 2 people, Helen Daly and Keith Millard, whose efforts contributed in a very big way to how and why we are all here today. In many ways, they each modeled, in their own different ways, what it is we are striving for when we talk about living more slowly. When we ask ourselves, how can we live more slowly? There's so much to do. A word with Helen or a moment of glancing into Keith's eyes would remind us, oh, right, it's the here and now. Right here and now is where I will fulfill what I'm meant to fulfill, where I will be who I'm meant to be. Both Helen and Keith died in the past year, Helen at 60 and Keith at 53. We need each other as models. We imbue ourselves with inspiration from each other. And when those who inspire us die, we are for a time bereft. And then that hole of bereftness begins to fill with spirit, however you define it. And we are again inspired. So perhaps you're remembering someone who has inspired you, someone whose life had an element of that slowness to it. You'll find in the foyer a remembrance table. That's where you can learn more about Helen and Keith. There are copies of their obituaries there. And where you can place an object in memory of someone that continues to inspire you. I know that both Keith and Helen would be very glad to be part of a community of inspirational people that we hold in our hearts. So I'd like to share a few brief words about Keith, and then I'll pass the baton to John, Helen's husband. Keith's life reflected in a very real and literal way the shift from the fast lane to the slow lane. He was deep, he was thoughtful, he was not reactive. He needed time, and he took time to respond. That was his way. We learned from that way, and we carry it with us. In moving to Brattleboro from San Mateo, California, with his rescue dog, Leon, in the late spring of 2011, Keith was enacting a lifestyle shift. He was moving from a high-powered lifestyle to a different place. During the course of his career as a financial analyst and strategic consultant, Keith completed over $35 billion in transactions, ranging from straight equity to complex structured finance issues, mergers, and acquisitions. He studied at both Harvard and Stanford. He also applied his finance and strategic skills to the not-for-profit community, where he was chairman of over 7 nonprofits and on the boards of 12 others. In moving to Vermont, Keith was consciously stepping into the slow lane. At the time of his death, he was working for Co-op Power in West Hatfield, Massachusetts, a renewable energy cooperative. He pursued his keen interest in jazz, art, photography, animals, gourmet cooking, and French history and culture. He also applied and freely donated his financial and strategic skills to nonprofits. He loved learning about his new home in Vermont and dove into his rural New England life with curiosity and enthusiasm. Co-workers shared that Keith was a generous and thoughtful person and a brilliant financial analyst. He took the best of what the for-profit world could offer and skillfully translated it into the world of community-based business development and finance. And his commitment to people and communities was inspiring. Keith died unexpectedly from an asthma attack in the early hours of Saturday, February 2nd, 2013, in his own home. Keith was a devoted member of the Episcopalian Church throughout his life and was an active congregant and elected vestry member at St. Michael's in Brattleboro. He was a passionate, lifelong learner and a dignified and spiritual man. As his dear friend Ann Latches shared, Keith will be remembered as a bright light that graced our community, a man of integrity who sought out projects that benefited mankind. Keith both led and gathered with others to put his shoulder and his deep intellect behind the wheel, a symbol of the planet he cared for so deeply. In losing Keith, we have lost a visionary, caretaker, a quiet, unassuming, and generous friend. In life, Keith came to realize joy in simplicity and the value of good friends.
It's ironic that Keith's job for the 2013 summit was to enroll me and to help me in honoring him. He was a gentle man, a a true gentleman. He was kind, thoughtful, reflective, calm. He chose Brattleboro, the world capital of slow living. He faithfully came to St. Michael's Episcopal Church contemplative service, the service that Helen had created several years ago: silence, meditation, and sacred chant. The contemplative mystical faith of Christianity was lost in the 3rd and 4th century. It was rooted in the wisdom tradition, the underground stream running through all great spiritual traditions. Wisdom fundamentally describes a higher level of consciousness, characterized by an alert, present moment awareness, a compassionate intelligence, and a substantial reduction of internal dialogue, which is the realm of the mind. This is actually slow living. This is mindfulness. This is ancient living, wisdom. I adored Helen Everly Daly. We went on one date and literally never left each other, a 30-year date. Helen's bio last year stated, "I am a practicing psychologist who combines 20 years experience and the latest brain neuroscience to help people change." Her life mission was to bring together the world's great spiritual traditions, cutting-edge neuroscience, and the best current psychological practice to teach as many people as possible how to upgrade their thinking and consciousness. In a nutshell, the more people can access their prefrontal medial cortex, the better we will be, and so will the planet. Born into the Christian faith, it was her goal simply to transform Christianity as we know it today. She thought that the summit was a great opportunity to teach slow living, mindfulness, teaching about the interior work that it is necessary. It is not in the mind, and it's not just a cognitive good idea. It comes from the heart. The mind gets in the way. Helen almost didn't make it to the summit. In April last year, we celebrated our 60th and 70th birthdays. We went on pilgrimage to Rome and Assisi, walked 8 hours a day in Rome. In Assisi, she developed severe back pain. She knew the pain. In 2004, she had had 11 hours of surgery to remove a spinal tumor. Going into surgery at that time, she had no idea if she would ever walk again. She surrendered herself to the process into the hands of Jesus and the surgeon. She was calm, not anxious. The hot dog-sized tumor, which was removed, was benign. She made a full recovery. In Assisi, we loaded her up with steroids and narcotics, and somehow she made it home. She presented at the summit in great pain, partially controlled with narcotics, the day after she arrived home. The day after the summit, an emergency MR study was done showing another huge tumor. I read the films immediately and told her. 4 days later, she was again on the operating table, this time for 8 hours. The surgeon did not look well when he came to talk to me at the end of the procedure. He couldn't get it all. It was embedded in the cauda equina. Frozen sections showed high mitotic activity. It was a very rare, highly malignant tumor. So mindfully back to the present slow summit. What can we learn in the slow lane that we can't learn in the fast? How can we learn to live slow? What inner transformations are necessary for slow living? Fortunately, my life, our marriage, and Helen's death are a perfect teaching tool. And I can only teach from what comes out of my heart. My own earlier life tells us about the ins and outs of the fast track. And symbolically, I will increase the cadence of my speaking to symbolize the increased nervous system tension. I was born and raised to be on the fast track. My grandfather, born in 1882, orphaned at age 2, no formal education, end of World War II, sold his machine to a company, 400 employees, invented many war-related items, including the safety catch and hand grenade. Father went to Harvard, a lawyer. We lived a very privileged life. I was sent to Groton School at age 18. I was the consummate, happy, pleasing overachiever. Father didn't pay taxes, embezzled money to support our lifestyle, all a secret. Law circling, he went up to his father's back doorstep, put a 12-gauge shotgun in his mouth, and pulled both triggers. I further burned into my DNA. I had to be rich, I had to be powerful, I had to have authority, be esteemed by my peers. The fast-track voltage was turned up 5,000 points. I worked my way through Harvard and medical school, no debt. I got married, trained in surgery, urology, owned a house in Cambridge, a farm in New Hampshire, by working on the average of only 120 hours a week. At age 40, after 17 years of marriage, 2 wonderful daughters, my first wife left me. And now I don't blame her. Well, that's the fast track. I know it. I lived it. I was wealthy. I was powerful. I was successful. I was honored by my peers. Yet I was miserable. I was rich, but with a bankrupt soul. The dominant force of driving the fast track is fear. Fear of failing, fear of scarcity, fear of not having enough. He who with the most toys at the end of his life wins. The greatest fear on the fast track, however, is death, when it all disappears. Enter Helen and a slow transition to a conscious marriage and finally a conscious death. It wasn't all smooth sailing. 2 strong egos, it was a miracle, and we slowly and eventually transformed each other. That's the nature of a conscious marriage. The movement was fueled and encouraged by love and acceptance. Love dispels fear. It has no place there. Helen and I facilitated a cancer support group in Cambridge for 3 years. These dying people were more alive than anyone we knew, living in the present moment and finally doing what they really wanted to. Helen and I looked at each other. What are we waiting for? In 6 months, I left my medical practice and staff position at 10 Boston hospitals, and we landed at Hollywood Farm, Chesterfield, New Hampshire. Thanking God, we were delivered from the city, moving towards slow living. Helen got her doctorate in clinical psychology. She developed a deep meditative practice, developing the quality of equanimity. I did the cooking, the shopping, the farm maintenance, ran my urological practice, specializing in the first and the second chakras. Helen was treated with proton beam radiotherapy and chemotherapy. 70% chance she would be cured. We were optimistic. She was making a good recovery, no pain, she was walking, doing physical therapy. On October 16th, another MRI in anticipation of her last chemotherapy. A fateful day. As soon as our study was finished, I read the films and immediately went to Helen. Shock. There was tumor all the way up her spinal cord to the base of her brain. Meningeal carcinomatosis. It was clear she was terminal. 50% are dead within 6 weeks. She took all of this information in, head on. She chose palliative care, and she came home to die. The last month of Helen's life was the saddest, and yet the most profoundly beautiful in my life. I was at her side every moment. She loved life. She did not want to die, but it would be, and it would be soon. Because of her profound spiritual and meditative practice, she was calm, she was directed, full of grace, full of love and equanimity. Her last month was like ALS, speeded up 1,000,000 times. On October 18th, she could support herself and take a step. On October 19th, she couldn't feel or move her feet. Over the next 3 weeks, She lost movement and sensation up to her chest. And then she lost the movement of her arms and hands. She surrendered it all with such love and grace. She was truly radiant and alive. She was transforming into all spirit. She was even curious about what was to come in death on the other side. 6 days before she died, Cynthia Bourgeot came, her wisdom teacher, with whom she had studied for several years. Helen and Cynthia did a teaching on conscious death. It was video recorded and is on deathinToLife.com. Helen wanted her death to be a teaching event. That day, Cynthia also married us for eternity. The last 6 days were overflowing with grace and love. When she could no longer use her hands, I fed her, and she joyously received peanut M&Ms. No longer worried about a healthy diet. It was just like feeding a slot machine. Her humor, her equanimity, her faith filled her up to the end. Our favorite time was at the end of the day, when I would lash my little trundle bed to her hospital bed. We would talk and cuddle and chant and fall asleep. On the night before she died, she couldn't support her head, and only her face had sensation. We awoke in the middle of that night. We kissed for over an hour, the most sensual, the most spiritual kisses. We devoured each other. We took each other in. We awoke at 6:30. She wanted a cup of coffee. I called my brother and sister-in-law. They came immediately. I was holding her hand. They were singing hymns. Her last 2 words were, "Sing, sing." And she took her last breath at 7:31 a.m., November 15th. The story continues. I know in my heart that love is as strong as death. As soon as Helen became all spirit, she jumped into it. The last 6 months, the most difficult of my life, I have grieved the physical loss of her earthly body, with torrents of daily tears. However, I've never felt lonely. Through our marriage, I struggled with my meditative practice. I am now meditating 3 times a day, effortlessly. Further transformation to slow and mindful living. I absolutely know and feel in my heart that through conscious marriage and conscious death, Helen's spirit now abides in me, and I in her. Just where my life will lead is unknown. I don't care. That is, I'm not anxious. I just know that it will be right. I'm just a witness of the present moment, full of gratitude and love. Thanks be to Helen.
Why don't we just take a minute of silence for Helen and Keith, for those of you who knew them, and for all of us meeting them tonight, and for anyone else who sits on our hearts, who has passed, but whose spirits are a part of who we are. Just take a minute. The quest for sustainability. What do we do now? I am so happy to introduce Ellen McCulloch Lovell, whose idea it was to bring Jonathan and Robert here to join us tonight at the summit. Ellen is in her 10th year as the first woman president of Marlborough College. When she's not tending to Marlborough, Ellen may most likely be found reading, writing poetry, or hiking with her husband. Ellen, please come on up. And Ellen will be handling the introductions and doing the moderating of the Q&A.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you, Lori, and I want to thank Orly Munsing for her good work, and join with John and Geraldine in remembering Helen and Keith. I'd like to evoke the naturalist John Muir to help us make this transition now. Muir said, "When we try to pick out anything by itself, we find it hitched to everything else in the universe." Although both the speakers I will introduce are singular intellectuals, sensibilities, and leaders, they are also connectors. People who understand that everything is hitched to everything else. Their work connects our economic activity with our environmental sustainability and our ability to sustain life on Earth to our personal responsibility. They share some connections as well. Both are Harvard educated, both worked internationally, both held leadership positions at the World Resources Institute, a Washington, D.C. think tank that develops research and policy on a variety of environmental and development issues. Robert Gruppetto will be our first speaker, and Jonathan Lash will follow. And I want to invite them to just come up and join us right now while I introduce them. To give you a little advance organizer, they've been asked to speak no longer than about 20 minutes each, and then I will engage them and engage you in a discussion. I understand that though we need to end by 8:30, right? Because they're showing a movie. I think we're the movie. Robert Gruppetto is our first speaker. He was vice president of the World Resources Institute and director of the economics program. Until recently, he was visiting professor at the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies and senior fellow at the Tim Worth Chair in the Graduate School of Public Affairs at the University of Colorado. Along the way, Rob served as a member of the National Research Council's Board on Sustainable Development and a member of the Environmental Economics Advisory Committee of EPA's Science Advisory Board. He taught at Harvard School of Public Health, was a World Bank official working in Indonesia, a Ford Foundation staff economist in India, and an economic analyst at the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. He is now a senior fellow at the United Nations Foundation and author of the recent book, America's Climate Problem, The Way Forward. What could be more timely? Get it from your local bookstore. Rob is known for his writings and research on the interconnections between the environment and the economy and on policies to promote sustainable development. You should also know that he is a playwright and a very accomplished tennis and basketball player, as well as a friend of Marlborough College. After Robert speaks, we will hear from Jonathan Lash, the president of Hampshire College, just down the road, president since May 2011. Jonathan came to New England from the World Resources Institute as well. I think, Rob and Jonathan, I think you overlapped for about 7 years at WRI, is that right? Mais ou menos. Okay.
Just long enough for him to teach me what I was doing.
Oh, that's very graceful. And under your leadership, Jonathan, WRI greatly expanded its programs. From 1993 to 99, he co-chaired the President's Council on Sustainable Development, a group of government, business, labor, civil rights, and environmental leaders appointed by President Bill Clinton. He was instrumental in the success of the U.S. Climate Action Partnership, which issued its call to action on global warming in 2007. 2007. 6 years ago. Jonathan also served as Vermont's Commissioner on Environmental Conservation in 1985 under Governor Madeline Kunin and was appointed Vermont Secretary of Natural Resources. He became Director of the Environmental Law Center at the Vermont Law School. He was formed by his Putney School student-driven education, his time as a Peace Corps volunteer in the Dominican Republic, and experienced training volunteers for that country, as well as El Salvador and Nicaragua. I'm pleased to welcome you back to Vermont, Jonathan, and as a colleague in our changing world of higher education. Both our keynoters have dedicated their lives to the most pressing problems of the planet. Please welcome them to Brattleboro and the Slow Living Summit.
Hello. How is everybody? I'm going to have to ask you to help me transition from what we've just heard, which was extremely moving, extremely personal, to something which is perhaps more global in scale and perhaps more intimidating. So, this is my first experience at the Slow Living Summit. I'm trying to absorb the spirit of the event. And I ask you to please bear that in mind if it starts to seem that my talk is never going to end. Let's start this way. It's taken more than 50,000 years, all of human history, for the economy and population to reach the size it is today. Look at the environmental disaster that has resulted to our forests, to oceans, to soils, to water resources, to air and the climate. Yet, it is confidently predicted that the world economy will double in size in the next 30 years and redouble in the 30 years after that. As the late Kenneth Boulding once said, to believe that this is possible, you have to be a madman or an economist. This sort of exponential growth is unsustainable. The economist Herbert Stein, who is better known as the father of the actor Ben Stein, said if something is unsustainable, it will stop. The only question is how. Will it stop because of ecological and human disaster, or will it stop because we change the system? The system must change fundamentally. Tweaking around the edges will not be enough. We have to think more broadly and more boldly. I know that many of you have been working to change the system in your own lives and your own fields, as I have in mine, which happens to be economics. Probably some of you think that economics is part of the system that has to change, and I agree. I've been working for the past 40 years to change how economics is done. If done right, it can be a powerful instrument of positive change. First of all, it's not just economists who seem to worship this growth fetish. Politicians and businessmen, growth in the aggregate, any kind of growth. People need to ask, growth in what? Growth forward. And for whom? For example, do we need more cars when there's already traffic congestion approaching gridlock in most of our cities? Or do we need better public transportation and bike paths and high-speed rail? Do we need more unhealthy processed foods to keep our waistlines expanding and the incidence of diabetes rising? Or do we need more healthy, locally produced foods? Do we need more energy-gobbling mansions with their lofty great rooms? Or do we need to revitalize our downtowns and rebuild our crumbling infrastructure? Better weapon systems or better schools? You get the idea. Then, it's not just what the economic system generates, it's how. The system we have now is a once-through system. When I studied economics in graduate school, we were taught about consumption functions and production functions, but both of those are misnomers. Nothing is produced, nothing is consumed. Thermodynamics tell us that matter and energy are conserved. What we do is transform them. Industries take raw materials and transform them into merchandise, generating huge amounts of waste in the process. Consumers take goods off the shelves, use them, and quickly discard most of them one way or another. There's really very little recycling. In one study, I've estimated that the U.S. economy generates more than 20 billion tons of waste products every year, including 6 billion tons of carbon in the form of carbon dioxide. People forget that everything in the coal that's burned to make electricity emerges as waste. All the carbon, all the mercury and other heavy metals, the sulfur, and so on. The result is enormous damage. My colleagues and I have calculated that those coal-fired power plants actually have negative value added. At the margin, the damage from harmful outputs outweighs the value of useful ones. For this reason, for 20 years, along with other economists, I've tried to get our government and other governments to reform the way national income and economic productivity are calculated in order to recognize the bad effects of growth as well as the good, to put values on environmental degradation and destruction of natural resources, to measure the bad outputs along with the good ones. The studies that we've done show that countries have been adding much less to their actual incomes than their statistics suggest. In some countries, including China, for example, growth in real income has been minimal and sometimes even negative. We're still trying to get this done after 20 years. It would help people think more deeply about growth. And you can help with this. Not only growth in what, but growth for whom. In the U.S., the richest 20% get half of all income. The bottom 40% get 12%. In other countries, it's even worse. The bottom share is 5 to 8%. Yet, studies show that after people rise into the middle class, where we all are, additional income does not make them any happier. Other things do. Family, health, job satisfaction, social connectedness, inner peace. We've actually been working on new measures of economic progress that focus on what actually contributes to a person's happiness. More money does make people feel more successful. That's a different thing. if you're a bond trader and the only indicator of success you have is how much money you make, it's not as if you're teaching kids to read or saving lives. So the luxury homes are mainly a way to signal success, what Veblen called conspicuous consumption. And that's an ever-escalating process. What good's a $300 watch if someone else has a $3,000 watch, or a $3,000 watch has a $30,000 watch? My watch costs $30, but it keeps very good time. In our economy, growth is sustained by want creation. Corporations have invested heavily in psychologists and the science of want creation to persuade people that they must keep spending on stuff they don't actually need. And they do this by tapping into people's most primitive emotions. Drive a Buick, you'll get the respect you've always longed for. Drink Bud Light, the hot chicks will be all over. People are constantly bombarded with advertising. This should change. People have to be able to say enough is enough. What if advertising expenditures were taxed or not deductible as business expenses? If the only way to raise the incomes of the bottom 40% who actually are made better off by higher living standards is to raise everybody's income proportionately, what the late Senator Moynihan called feeding the sparrows by feeding the horses, it's not going to work. We're doomed. The good news is that a small shift in the distribution of income can make a huge difference for those near the bottom of the scale because their share is so small. The bad news is that those with high incomes and wealth come the political power to grasp even more wealth. In this country, the distribution of income and wealth has become even more unequal during our lifetimes. And the disproportionate access to political power is a threat to democracy in this country. Changing the political system to reduce the influence of money, especially corporate money, is fundamental. I've tried to make corporate lobbying on public policy issues subject to approval and control by the board of directors, which would be a good first step. Others are working to force companies to disclose their lobbying activities. You can help by supporting these kinds of shareholder resolutions. When I came out of graduate school, I asked myself what use to make of all those economics courses. I decided to go off to India and solve the world poverty problem. I spent many years in South Asia. I worked very hard, and I finally solved the problem, at least on paper. I found that people are poor because they have no capital of any kind, no human capital, no education, poor health, no financial capital, they're in debt, no physical capital, they're landless or small tenants, sharecroppers. All they have is their labor. So I advocated the land redistribution program. That didn't fly. A few years later, along came Muhammad Yunus with a better idea, microcredit and the Grameen Bank. So it goes. But the same situation is pretty much true in the U.S., if you think of it. Low education, people in debt, houses in foreclosure or underwater. So the immediate answer is employment of what these people do have, which is their labor, jobs. Politicians always talk about jobs. They like to talk about jobs. Yet the system is strongly biased against employment. We tax payrolls, wages, and salaries and make hiring people more expensive, but give tax breaks to investment income, dividends, capital gains. Unrealized capital gains can be tax sheltered indefinitely. Interest costs are tax deductible. We encourage capital investment with accelerated depreciation and other incentives. The system also encourages migration of employment abroad by letting corporations avoid taxation altogether as long as they keep profits from foreign operations overseas. This has to change. For some years, colleagues and I promoted the idea of a tax shift. We did this down in WRI, as a matter of fact, reducing taxes on payrolls, wages, and salaries, and replacing the revenues with taxes on materials and wastes. This would encourage employment and also help bend the system away from this once-through flow of materials. And there are two ways, basically, to do this. You can tax waste either at the back end, when they come out as waste products and residuals and emissions, or at the front end, when they start as material inputs and raw materials. In our system, there are huge incentives for the use of raw materials. $10 billion in subsidies annually to the oil and gas industry. Many times that worldwide. Mining, grazing, harvesting on the public lands are given away for next to nothing. This is another thing that has to change. The current version of taxing waste products is a policy that penalizes carbon emissions by putting a price on carbon emissions. This could be a carbon tax, but a better option actually is a cap-and-trade system like RGGI in the Northeast and the one being installed in California and other western states. This is crucial. It is crucial. Climate change is the mother of all sustainability issues. It's what the military call a force multiplier. It makes all the other unsustainability issues that much worse. Biodiversity, oceans, forests, and so on, all are threatened by climate change, in addition to all the other threats that they face. We are hurtling toward a change in the world's climate unseen during the period of human civilization, and probably irreversible for hundreds of years. We're unleashing vicious circles of climate change that are likely to put the process beyond our control. Scientists have been warning about this for decades to no avail. Tomorrow or the next day, you're going to hear from Gus Beth, a former colleague at WRI as well, who, when he was chairman of the Council on Environmental Quality way back in the Carter administration, was trying to alert the nation to this. Nothing, very little has happened from this point. Why? Well, the fossil fuel interests and their representatives have used the same strategy to ward off climate policy action that was used to ward off tobacco legislation. Claim that there's no proof. Manufacture a phony scientific debate. Spend heavily on lobbying and public relations. You all have adopted your lifestyles for sustainability, I gather. But there are 7 billion people worldwide striving for a better standard of living. They may, in principle, be in favor of environmental protection, but they don't follow through in their personal behavior and buying decisions. We need to align those people's economic self-interest and their values. We need a price on carbon that automatically gets people and businesses to consider the damages of carbon emissions just as they go about their everyday activities, trying to make or save or spend money. Cap and trade is the better way to do this because it's an approach that sets an overall limit on carbon emissions and that gets gradually stricter over time. And then gives energy users complete flexibility on how to meet those targets. The declining availability of fossil fuels means market prices go up, along with the costs and prices of all goods that use fossil fuels. Therefore, it encourages energy efficiency, it encourages the use of non-carbon renewable energy, which is already falling dramatically in cost and rapidly increasing in scale. There's talk in Washington now, again, about a carbon tax as part of the deficit reduction agreement, but it's very difficult to get Congress to pass such a tax. And a carbon tax wouldn't give the same degree of control anyway, because nobody knows how high the tax rate would have to be to accomplish the goal. And the effect would vary with economic conditions, and it would only emerge over considerable periods of time. I've argued in my latest book that there's an urgent need to control emissions before climate change becomes self-reinforcing because of these positive feedbacks. It's easy to get discouraged about the prospects of doing this, but you should bear in mind that there have been tipping points in environmental policy, long periods of apparent stagnation, and then rapid breakthroughs. In the early 1970s, for example, within just 2 or 3 years, all the major environmental laws were put in place. EPA was created, Congress passed the National Environmental Policy Act, requiring environmental impact statements, the Clean Air Act, the Clean Water Act, and others were all passed just in those few years. The question that interested me was what brings about these tipping points. I wrote a book on the subject that found mainly the main impetus has been mobilization of public awareness and interest. In the 60s and early 70s, people, notably led by students, were on the streets and on the march. They could not be ignored. Washington was forced to act. If there's any hope of changing the system before it's too late, and there's not much time, we all must reach beyond our local communities and personal lifestyles. We must also mobilize and act on a broader scale as well to change the system fundamentally. This is a challenge for all of us, otherwise the world for our children and grandchildren will be one of increasing calamity. Thank you for your attention.
I was serious in what I said earlier about the opportunity to spend 7 years working with Bob, and he's the best policy analyst I've ever known after nearly 2 decades of running a premier policy analytical shop, and it was a pleasure to work with him. It was often said that Bob is the kind of policy analyst who hunts with a spear. The spear is not only the sharp tip of his tongue, but the incredible force of his analysis, well worth getting his book. I want to thank John and Jerlin for the way you started us out this evening. The emotional honesty and the connection to reality and humanity just seemed like the right place for us all to be to start this evening. And leads me to want to back away from my initial thoughts about talking about policy and what will change the global track that we're on, and talk a little bit more about my own recent experience with the Hampshire College community and how I got there and how it's changed me. As Ellen told you, I'm a novice college president on a very, very steep learning curve. A novice college president with no academic background. I'm a lapsed Vermonter, a one-time lawyer, and have spent most of my life as a passionate advocate around issues of environment and sustainability, just because what we were doing to the earth made me so mad, and it still does. But I've gone through this incredible shift in my life. I was happily running this extraordinary organization, the World Resources Institute. We had programs, we had offices in 8 countries, programs in 50 countries. I got to work with everyone from the president of Brazil to the chairman of GE on innovative strategies that I thought were creating actual changes. And then I was sitting one dreary March Saturday afternoon clearing my emails and saw still another email from Headhunter. And I mean, I just, for years I've routinely deleted those. And I happened to open this one, I don't know why. And it said something about Hampshire College. And I recalled that a dear friend of mine named Adele Simmons had been president of Hampshire College way back in the 70s and early 80s. And that was before she became president of the MacArthur Foundation, which was our mother institution, gave the grants that started the World Resources Institute. And I called Adele, and I said, I got this email from Hampshire College that they're looking for a new president. She said, would you consider doing that? And I said, Adele, I've never heard of the place before. And she began a campaign and persuaded me I should at least go meet with the search committee. If any of you know Hampshire College, you'll know that I was getting myself in for an experience. So they flew me and my wife up to Boston. We actually went incognito and drove around the campus. It was late March, it was dreary. The students all looked depressed, the houses looked depressed, the grass was still covered with bits of dirty snow. And we went back down to Logan, and I walk into this room about the size of this room, and it's the search committee. I mean, they had half the campus, including a group of students. And I had barely said good morning when the students started after me with their questions. And just one after the other, they planned in advance, they'd agreed who was going to pursue which line of questioning. They didn't accept my answers. And all the faculty and administrators and trustees on the search committee were deferring to these young people. And somewhere about half an hour into this interrogation that I was undergoing, I had this epiphany, this moment. I thought to myself, I have been working on issues of sustainability for 35 years, and everything that I've worked on has gotten worse faster over that period of time. I mean, I'm enormously proud of the work that Bob and our colleagues did at WRI, of the things that we accomplished, but you follow the trends, not good. And I suddenly thought, if anybody is going to change it, it is going to be people like these students who just would not accept answers, who challenged everything, who were full of passion, and who believed that things had to change. And I walked out of there with this sense that if I could help them, this would be a good way to spend the last decade of my professional career. And I went upstairs to see my wife, and she took one look at me and she said, oh shit, you're going to do this, aren't you? And here I am. I absolutely love the place. I don't know if you know anything about Hampshire. I'm going to talk a little bit about efforts to create a mindful culture at Hampshire, but you need to know a little bit about the place first. It is a learner-centered educational institution. It is a place that was founded on the idea that the institution shouldn't focus on teaching, it should focus on learning. And that if you focused on learning, it had to be about the students, not about the faculty. It builds its education by asking every student to take responsibility for her own education. By challenging students to recruit committees of faculty to help them to design their own curriculum, to decide what question drives them, to dig really, really deeply into whatever it is that they're passionate about, to test all of the assumptions that everyone has ever given them about those questions, to develop solutions, to try things that people say they shouldn't do. I had a group of students come see me the beginning of last year, and they wanted a grant from the president's office. They wanted to enter something called a health hackathon. Maybe you know what hackathon is. I didn't. They explained that teams of students were meeting at the University of Massachusetts for a weekend to develop apps to improve health outcomes. And they would get a few hours of lectures about health problems, and then they'd try to develop these apps, and there'd be a set of judges who would pick the winners. And they said, we're going to be one of the only teams of undergraduates. We're not going to win, but we think it'd be really great experience and training. We need a small grant to help us pay the entry fee. So I gave them a grant. And they came back to see me the next week looking really sheepish and said, we won. They had developed this smoking cessation app, which is just fabulous. What they did was amazing. And so I was incredibly proud and ready to go brag about them. And they said, well, we need another grant. Because now we qualify for the big one at MIT. We're going to be the only team without a healthcare professional on our team. We're going to be the only team of undergraduates. But what an incredible experience. So I said, of course, yes, sure. And they said a little more money, actually, because we have to get to Boston. We have to stay there. And we hope that you'll sort of signal to our professors that it's okay that, we're going to be focusing on this. And so it was a couple of weeks off, and I forgot about it because we were having a fight about something on campus. And so they come back and see me. It's early November. We won again. Now, this is classic of Hampshire students. The reason that they won again was because they didn't know they couldn't, because obviously they couldn't. But they developed this app which was a decision logic that enables a remote healthcare provider to guide someone on the scene through a set of triage decisions or care decisions. It's called TREX. It's now being more widely applied. They've got a patent on it. They're developing a company. I was just blown away. I was blown away not just that they were so talented and did such great things, but that they just sort of casually went out there and assumed that if they were interested, they should go try and created things that no one else thought of. I love working with this group of students. I love working with the alumni. I have been finding that when I meet with groups of alumni, which of course is the job, right? That in 5 minutes they're talking about how Hampshire shaped their lives. I don't know about you, Bob. When I go back and meet with my old class at Harvard, we talk about politics, we talk about kids. We do not talk about the education and how it shaped our lives. But this is a different group. A third of them describe themselves as entrepreneurs. 26% have started their own entity, either for-profit or non-profit. They don't really make a distinction because it's all about changing the world. They're out there putting ideas into action. I love working with them. But I was shocked when I got there to find that this place, so full of energy and creativity, people challenging the rules, people asking questions, people doing critical thinking, really hadn't done much on issues of sustainability and especially issues of climate. And we had alums out there doing fabulous stuff. Gary Hirschberg, the founder of Stonyfield Yogurt, was one of our alums. Stephen McDonald, who created Applegate Farms, the sustainable meat supplier, another alum who was the largest purveyor of sustainably farmed fish in the world. They're out there, but on campus, it was really, I don't know, sort of dead. No thought going into these issues. And I plotted some with Gary, and he agreed to invest in helping us address these questions. And our challenge to ourselves and to the campus was, how do we create a culture of sustainability so that everybody, every student, whether he's studying filmmaker because he wants to be like Ken Burns, who's one of our alums, or political history, or environmental science, or computer science, has the experience of asking the questions about how we live and what it means for the world, for our community and our larger community, about the choices that Bob was talking about and how they fit with our everyday lives, and what we can do on the campus that demonstrates those choices, gives us practice in those choices. We decided, I didn't think of it as mindfulness, but it really is about mindfulness. We decided that we would start with food. These are adolescents, and the fastest way to their heads is through their stomachs. And we were feeding them absolute swill. We have this 250-acre organic farm. We have a fabulous 890-acre campus. We have every opportunity in the world in one of the richest agricultural areas anywhere on Earth to be mindful about food consumption, and we were feeding them basically industrial calories. So we set out in the process to involve students in thinking about what should we be doing? How do we feed ourselves in a way that reflects our values and the fact that we're going to have to figure out how to feed 9 billion people on an earth in which food production systems are being disastrously undermined by changing weather. And what does all this have to do with justice? Who gets to eat anyway? And how does what we choose to eat affect that? And by the way, what is it doing to our health? It turns out they're really interested in that. So we had this extremely energetic, emotional process in which we found a new food service provider, took bids, asking them to talk to us not about providing us the cheapest meals, but how does this relate to education? How does it relate to culture? What are you going to do to help us live in a way that reduces our footprint on the world, and what are we going to do that helps you be a better food service provider? We ended up connecting with Bon Appetit. I don't know if any of you have worked with them, but Fidel Bauchio founded Bon Appetit to disrupt food service in the same way that my predecessors founded Hampshire to disrupt education. And we're going to cook up something really interesting on that campus. And we are getting our students to think about the implications of what they eat and how they eat and how it's grown and who grows it, who gets it, and so forth. And then we want to go on, of course, to make all of that part of the curriculum, but to develop broader curriculum. What about sustainability in the arts? And what about social justice in the arts? How do we discuss that? What is the role of the artist? In thinking about the questions Bob was posing to you, they're about our culture, right? They're about our culture of consumption. Who changes that? It's not actually advocates, it's people who define the culture. So why isn't that an absolutely essential part of the study of humanities and the arts? How are the humanities and the arts going to survive if they don't address those questions? We began to examine our own plan for our campus and developed a climate action plan. I actually got my board to commit to going to zero carbon. In fact, we're building the first new building on campus in 35 years. And it will be a zero net energy building, and we've committed never to build anything again that isn't either zero net energy or doesn't contribute green energy back to the the grid, and all of that is a learning opportunity for students. They are involved in every design decision, every economic decision. We have a revolving fund. I just put some money in a fund and told a group of students who had been pushing me to put more money into things they believed in, you decide. You figure out where this money would get the best return environmentally and financially. You figure out how we can pay ourselves back, and then you can invest it. And interestingly, they started out and they thought that we were going to turn all of our vehicles into electric vehicles. And the first investment they made was in replacing all the lighting in the theaters. It was 40 years old. It wasn't working. It was going to cause a fire. And it turned out that by replacing it with LEDs, we'll get a 3.5-year payback and be saving hundreds of tons of CO2 emissions. And they had to go through all the calculation. Well, imagine what they'll be like when they get turned loose on the world, knowing how to do those calculations and how to make those decisions, and why that was a smart place, and why they got double benefits, right? The drama and dance students are passionate about getting these new lighting systems, and also passionate about doing something that's greener. This is turning out to be fun. They're pushing me. I'm learning stuff I never knew. And I'm discovering why something has stopped hurting. I've actually been beating my head against brick walls for 35 years, trying to figure out how to make other people in other countries change what they do. And now I'm at this campus, and Ellen knows this better than anybody, you know, the economics of small liberal arts colleges just aren't great these days. There are myriad problems. We're very young, our alumni is young, they don't give us the kind of money they should. We're competing against schools with billion-dollar endowments, and we don't have one. But it's actually possible to do things, and it's about our community. It's about changing what we do and how we live, and giving students the power to drive those changes, but at the same time the responsibility to think about what they're doing, and that turns out to be an absolute blast. That is really fun. So if I think back to that day when the students were going after me, hammer and tongs, when they're interviewing me, and I was thinking, these are the people who are going to change the world, it was a good guess. I still feel really good about that. One of the things that we have to do in order to make this place economically viable is make it a 12-month campus. We've been renting out our space to a fat camp during the summer. That didn't really seem to align with our values, and it doesn't pay very well. So we've launched a summer program. A lot of it is going to be about sustainability and social change. It'll be a place to come and spend 8 weeks studying a variety of strategies for social change. Or if you want to come spend 8 weeks on the farm and take a food farm and sustainability course that starts you in the fields in the morning, gets you to the labs in the afternoon, and in the evening talks about global policy. This is a good place. We are going to have this summer a course on sustainability and the sacred, which is attempting to develop activism rooted in awareness, spirituality, and community, which I learned about. I actually didn't know we were doing that. I learned about it just the day before coming up here, but it seemed so appropriate to the Slow Living Summit. So that's all making me very happy. And I guess, in a sense, I'm slowing down, right? I'm just living in my community in real time, seeing what's possible. But I want to try to pull back a little bit. I do think this is profoundly important, this business of what we're doing in our own community. I was very, very engaged in trying to get legislation through the United States Congress in 2009, 2010 to put a price on carbon, and we thought we were going to be able to do it. as Ellen said, I was involved with this group of industry CEOs and environmental CEOs that reached agreement on recommendations for the kind of cap and trade system that Bob recommended. And so we had the CEOs of GM and GE and DuPont and Dow and Caterpillar lined up saying, look, climate change is real, we have to deal with it, along with the leaders of major environmental groups. And after all, during the 2008 presidential election, both candidates had said climate change is real and we had to deal with it. And people elected to the Congress, a majority said this is a real issue. And we managed to push through a bill, the country managed to push through a bill through the House that would have been a very strong start addressing climate change. And there was never a vote in the Senate, never came up for a vote. The White House never pushed it. Senator Reid never scheduled a time for it to come to the floor. There was never even a markup of a serious bill in the United States Senate. And I have to say I was totally stunned. I was so naive that I really thought we were going to get it done. I could, if somebody wants to ask later, I'll tell you why I think that happened and what was going on and so forth in politics. But I really was at an emotional low. I was completely gobsmacked. I just didn't know how to deal with it, and every other environmental leader I knew was trying to figure out what the hell was going on and how to respond. And I thought a lot about large-scale changes. The end of slavery, women's suffrage, the reduction in smoking and advertising of cigarettes. I thought about all those because they involved large-scale, profound attitude changes on a global scale. When the first advocates of women's suffrage began meeting in the United States in the 1830s, they were laughable. They were derisible. There was no possibility that they would win. How could women win the vote when women didn't have the vote? I mean, it just would never happen. But it did happen. It did happen. It took about 80 years. It took actually about 90 years from the first serious movement to abolish slavery for the abolition movement to not only succeed in the United States, but in Brazil and Russia. I just ask you to think about this. I think that we're asking for a change at the same level. How does it come about? How does it happen? How do we overcome the lunacy of climate denial? And I really think that in all those cases, an important part of it was the reality of how people chose to live. The model that something different was possible, leading to the moral conclusion that living differently was necessary. Anyway, thank you very much for the opportunity to come talk with you.
Thank you both so much. Why am I not surprised that the president of Marlborough College and the president of Hampshire College could give each other speeches? You left us with a very big, important question. And Rob, otherwise known as Bob, you also left us with a big challenge, which is to go beyond the personal and even the local to the national and the global if we're going to address these big questions. I think it's time to bring the rest of you in, and so I would love to invite your questions for either or both speakers. It would be fun to hear them both respond to some thoughtful questions. I'm sure you have a lot, and who would like to begin? Right down front. Yes? You raised your hand? Yeah.
Thank you. Big Tobacco started their campaign to debunk established facts about smoking, I think in the middle 60s, maybe it was in late 50s. And I think we could argue that they were largely successful until whenever it was in the 90s when a colossal lawsuit began to collect something on the damages that they did. So that's what, 40 years. And you said 80 years for women's suffrage, 90 to abolish slavery. And we keep hearing things like, if we don't reverse what's happening with global climate change in the next 2 or 3 years, it's going to get into a positive reinforcement loop, and there's no changing it after that. So we've heard a lot of gloom and doom. Do you have any inspiring things to say about what we might do to bring about change that you said was forestalled in the Senate?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's hear from both of you. Jonathan, you want to start?
So I think we're 35 years in now. I actually, Bob mentioned that our friend Gus Speff started talking about this issue in 1980. And I think that began the serious discussion. So we're further along. There is global awareness. There's a science process. What I find most encouraging is the range not only of individual citizens, municipal leaders, college presidents who are just saying, oh, for goodness sake, let's get on with it, let's go ahead and do something, but the range of industrial leaders who were willing to step forward and just say, yeah, we know we're going to be operating in an effectively zero carbon world. Let's, give us the rules so we can move ahead. I don't think this is impossible. I just think we're coming to the end of denial and we're going to get into anger soon.
No, I don't think we have 80 or 90 years of this. We're already experiencing the effects of climate change in the form of the increasing frequency of extreme weather events. Now, many people don't understand the difference between weather and climate. Weather is, whether it's hot or rainy or stormy or whatever, climate is the frequency with which these happen. How often does it rain? How often does the temperature get up to 90 and so on? More extreme weather is becoming more frequent. Heat waves, droughts, more intense storms, flooding. And it's just, there's a recent report by the U.S. Global Change Research Commission saying, it's just going to get worse. There's a poem by Richard Wilbur, who's a graduate of Amherst College, that I like, called Advice to a Prophet. It starts off, when he comes, as he soon must, to the streets of your city, not proclaiming our doom, but begging you in God's name to have self-pity. He's talking to us. We're endangering our lives, the lives of our children, the lives of millions of people around the world. And I feel it's essential for people to take action. You can't just sit there and let it happen. And it's, you know, I'm supporting Ed Markey for Senate in Massachusetts. He came to Amherst, and and he was co-sponsor of the Waxman-Markey bill. He's good on this issue, but I think, you know, the record of the U.S. Congress on this issue is disgraceful. Anything we can do to change that, we should do.
Both of you seem to be advising political mobilization and political action, and I think our young people are leading the way, but I think you're also saying we can't wait for them to finish with their educations and their experiments. What practical action would both of you advise for citizens right now, today?
You know, I think the key word is citizens. You know, I don't always agree on everything that Ralph Nader says, but he has this organization, Public Citizen. So it's the responsibility of citizens to participate actively according to their opportunities and means in public life. I think it's obligatory for all of us to try to do that.
Yeah, I would give a twofold answer. I started working on environmental issues in the period that Bob was talking about, when most of our major legislation was passed. And it was a period in which the political strategy was disclose some environmental catastrophe, scare the hell out of people, develop public anger, and stampede the Congress. And we're having a way harder time right now about that around climate issues for reasons that you will probably understand better than I do. But that just means that we have to be more politically engaged. But my sense is that right now the thing that's having the biggest effect is that all over the country, and especially in the Northeast where the incentives are so good, people are putting solar PV on their roofs. And towns are adopting ordinances to change their practices. And people are going to corporate annual meetings and asking what the strategies are for succeeding in a zero carbon economy. And colleges are managing their endowments differently to try to reflect their values. We, after all, our business is to make long-term investments in the education of young people. It's weird that many of us invest our money without any consciousness of the impacts that it has on the fate of those young people. But I actually do see all those things having an impact.
Next question. Do I see somebody in the back? Yeah? Over here? Yep.
Hi, thank you. I got a lot of what you both said. I especially like the part about the tipping point. I spend a lot of time in the political arena. And one thing I'm always surprised of, and I want to defend the politicians a little bit, because none of the citizens that I ever am with ever ask a question about the environment. They don't ask a question about agriculture. What they ask questions about is how do they get more tax incentives. And I think the politicians are responding. We need a groundswell of people to stand up and really make the change. I know Transition Town is doing it, and maybe, do you think it's better to just peel off from the growth economy and try and make the change that way?
Well, I applaud and greatly respect what you all are doing in your own communities and in your own personal lives, and I times, and it is important. But, you know, let's be honest, you're a minority and not even a big minority. There are lots and lots of people who don't grasp it in this country, and even more so around the world. And somehow we have to work towards that tipping point. There are tipping points in politics and policy just as there are in the natural world. I would hope that we can surprise ourselves by what we can accomplish. But we can only accomplish that sort of transition if we go out and push for it. It won't happen of itself because, as you said, you know, there are a lot of other things on the political agenda, and one of the things that retards change is things falling down to the bottom of the political agenda. One of the things that was the problem that Jonathan was talking about. So we have to find ways to elevate that, and in a democracy, it depends on us to do it.
So I just want to add one brief word to that. When Al Gore decided that the purpose of his life for a time was going to be an inconvenient truth, and that he was basically going to give over his entire life to persuading people that it was time to act on climate change, he was very much committed to a strategy built around the idea that there was a tipping point, we were close enough to it, that it would be possible to put us over, because the country did seem to be moving in that direction. And I don't know what opinions are of Al here. I thought he did a fabulous job. He has a tremendous audience globally. He raised the profile of the issue in a remarkable way. And he ran into something, and angry as I am at the coal companies and at fossil fuel companies, I actually don't think it was them. This country has never passed major environmental legislation when unemployment was over 7%. And the Obama administration came in, the new Congress came in, and unemployment was at 9.5%. And it's not surprising people wouldn't be asking about the environment. We're still at that point that people are asking about their own short-term future rather than long-term future. I think we'll be back. And I think we'll be back stronger because people are experiencing it so much. You remember the cover on Bloomberg after Sandy? The black cover that said, "It's global warming, stupid," with a picture of New York underwater. Those things are really affecting people. I do think there will be a political opportunity. I'm just not enthusiastic that this is the year. We did a word cloud of everything said at the Democratic Convention and the Republican Convention. Nothing in the Republican Convention, Democratic Convention, tiny, tiny little reference to environment, global warming, climate change, doesn't appear anywhere in the word cloud for either convention. These are very sophisticated politicians reflecting what they think will sell. People's attention was elsewhere.
If I remember, the word jobs came up, number one.
Yeah, jobs.
The economy.
The economy, yeah.
Yes, right in the middle there.
I just want to follow up on Jonathan. You made a very good suggestion in terms of colleges and universities taking a look at their investments. And I think some of you will know that Bill McKibben, who teaches up the road at Newberry College, Bill started 350.org quite a few years ago with the intention of getting the Congress and the President, whoever he or she might be, to pass significant climate change legislation. And in October or November of 2012, Bill announced a new campaign, which was to get hundreds of colleges and universities to do what was done during the apartheid era in South Africa, which was to get colleges and universities and cities and states with large pension funds to divest of all of their fossil fuel holdings in the next 5 years. And that's happening now in over 200 or 300 colleges and universities around the country, and it's something that everybody can get involved in, either as an alum or as someone who lives in a community, say where Amherst College is. If you live around Amherst College, you can participate in that campaign. And it's something that's different than the traditional get Congress to do it, because Bill and the best people at 350.org said Congress and the President are not going to do it. So it's really simple. Go to gofossilfree.org, see if your college that you graduated from or the town or city that you live in is engaged, and click on Amherst College if that's the one, or Marlborough College if that's the one, and then it'll tell you what to do. You can make a difference starting tonight.
Thank you.
They're also targeting, if that's the right word, congregations and towns and any institution that has endowments that might be available.
So adding other endowments to that same campaign. Is there a question? Do you have a question?
I do.
All right. Yeah, good idea if you'd stand and speak into the microphone. That would be really helpful.
Thanks for taking my question. I wanted to bring the conversation a little bit back towards the emotional tone that was set. I was very touched by the stories that were shared tonight. Particularly, I connect with the idea that people lack capital in the world to make a difference. Bob, I think you mentioned it first. My power was shut off this morning, so I really understand that. However, I also had the privilege of being part of the Occupy movement and seeing so many people literally on the streets, very in touch with their anger. In fact, traumatized by the anger of the people around them. And there's just this really strong current of dense emotional energy, that doesn't become part of the political conversation because it's not polite. And there's not degrees given to people who have that kind of experience in the world. And there's so much intelligence and wisdom in that anger that I just wondered, we're talking about federal politics, but what about the politics of our interrelationships? Can you guys talk about that a little bit?
Excuse me, what was the last?
I'm curious to hear what you would say about the politics of our interrelationships and how, different social classes and different psychological wellness capacities in us kind of limit our interconnectedness and limit our power, I think, to mobilize. Can you speak to that a little?
I can try. I happened to be in Washington, and I was there in what was it, Farragut Square, where these folks were set up in D.C., and I was chatting with them and trying to encourage them in what they were doing. Frankly, I don't believe that always being polite and so on is effective. So when I see students and young people who are disaffected expressing themselves in public or in private, I'm all for that. The other thing I would say is that, who are the people who are going to be most victimized by environmental degradation in general and climate change effects in particular? Well, it's not going to be the people who are well insulated by their wealth and so on. It's going to be the people who are most vulnerable who will bear the heaviest burden. That's true in this case. But if you look overseas, it's even more true. I spent years working in Bangladesh, where just a mega disaster is waiting to happen, with essentially 150 million people living on a mudflat at the mouth of the Ganges Brahmaputra River. The world's, those are the people, kinds of people, who are the most vulnerable.
Yes?
Alex Wilson from Brattleboro, Dummerston area.
Hi, Alex.
Like others here, I've been working for many years to try to effect change and particularly mitigate climate change, including starting a business 25 years ago focused on green building. But I've come over the last few years to conclude that convincing people to make change, to change the way they do things simply because it's the right thing to do, isn't working quickly enough. So I've, in recent years, been focused on resilience and the idea of convincing people of vulnerabilities and the solutions to those vulnerabilities, like extended power outages from storms and so forth, are to create the types of zero energy buildings those of us in this room have been doing for the reasons because it's the right thing to do, but to do it as a public safety and to keep your family safe and healthy. So I'm curious, how this resilience argument plays into your thinking today as a way to bring about change and kind of get at the mitigation efforts through the back door of safety and keeping our families safe. Ideas that I believe even the Rush Limbaughs of the world could get behind.
Sure. First, I guess the simplest answer is yes. I think it's a very powerful argument. And I think it becomes more powerful as people feel more threatened by the pace of change. I had the opportunity to do an experiment with a group of profoundly rational people, a group of CEOs from big companies. And having spent a lot of time arguing with them about how they should change policies in the short term because of the risks they faced and so forth, we tried flipping that around and got them to agree to spend a morning imagining themselves as the CEO of their company in 2050, and to do the math to figure out what they thought conditions would be in the economy in which they'd be operating in 2050. And if you choose any emissions path, and you accept what Bob said about the economy doubling in size, and you assume any level of rationality by the human race, at that point we'd be making profound efforts to reduce emissions. And because of the growth of economies and populations in developing countries, the impact of that on the developed countries by 2050 would be the inevitability of profound cuts. And since there are areas of the economy where it's much harder to cut out carbon, the likelihood is that the carbon per GDP, the carbon intensity, is going to be near zero, that they're going to be operating in a zero carbon environment. And they convinced themselves of that. They just did the math, that nobody could escape it. There was no way they could come up with a different answer than equivalent of a zero carbon environment. Then we asked them, if you're that person, what would you wish that your predecessor in 2011, because this was 2011, would have done to make your company resilient so that it's succeeding in 2050. And it had this absolutely electrifying effect. There's no reason, it's sort of what the transition movement does at a town level. It's just a different way of looking at what our obligation is today if we want our children to survive tomorrow.
Let me just add a word. I'm sure that what you say is right, that you can get to people through their concern about safety and resilience. But I want to circle back to where you started, which was, people don't always act just because it's the right thing to do. And excuse me if I talk as an economist for a minute, by saying that one of the things about prices is that they convey information. Since I spend part of the year in Colorado where water is an issue, talk about water. Many communities, water that we use in our households is priced way below the marginal cost of adding to the availability. And consequently, people have bluegrass lawns in deserts. The price doesn't convey the information that water is scarce. If the price accurately reflected the scarcity, then people would think about xeriscaping or think about more efficient irrigation, or think about changing the shower heads. That's why I took your thought and said we have to have honest prices that reflect real costs in the economy.
Thank you. Yes, back there.
My name is Karen Ribeiro from Amherst, Mass. And I have a lot of things on my mind and in my heart, and they may not come out in a nice linear way that's easy to hear, but I will try to wrap them up and share an opinion that is also a question. I had an intern this past semester from Hampshire College who was the single best intern I've ever had. And he was punctual, grounded, he was a vegan, he was passionate, and worked really hard and did a great job. Yet he had the fear of the future that so many of us had, that you spoke to about job insecurity, that is such a palpable, prevalent concern for most of us. So his impulse is to work for a financial firm making a lot of money, because that's his main goal. One other thing that I'd like to share is that I'm so grateful for all the people who are activists, who are out there on the front lines, protesting the Keystone Pipeline or Occupy Wall Street, all the things that people are showing up in mass to do. Personally, I have sacrificed 2 really good careers, and my family is about as fragile as the planet, our well-being. I think that's okay. And I wonder what the world would be like if we were all in that situation where we were representative in a way, that there wasn't that big gap in the 1% or the whatnot. But I can't give any more of my time, and one of our elected officials said, we need all of you to be out there on the front lines doing all this and writing our congressman, and I do everything I possibly can, but I have no more to give. I don't know if, that there are probably a lot of people who have more to give. But that's a real concern of mine, that I see all these problems and I physically, mentally, emotionally cannot give anymore. And the last thing that I want to say is that I believe that agriculture can be the solution by putting more people on the fields to really grow our food, to move labor from the intellectual information sphere to the land, that we may be able to find some parity or some rebalancing of the economy and the environment together. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that, and if there are other ideas that you have that could create some a similar parity or rebalancing of the environment and the economy. Thank you.
Yeah. First of all, don't feel bad. You're doing everything you can. That's fine. If you can't do more, that's fine. But agriculture is a very good example. There's very, very different ways of farming. You can. Now, I drive across country at least once or twice a year, go through the Midwest. A man and one helper can farm 3,000 acres, and they've got all monster machinery. It's highly mechanized. One of my stepsons was an organic farmer out there, and he and a couple of friends farmed intensively a couple of acres and sold it at the farmer's market. What I was trying to get across was our system is set up to encourage production of foods, just about everything else, in the most capital-intensive and least labor-intensive way possible, because that turns out to be the cheaper, the way we've structured it. It doesn't have to be that way.
Jonathan, did you want to add to that? I think if you could pose a very short question and Rob and Jonathan could give very short answers, that would be our last question. And then Lori's going to come to the stage to wrap us up.
Thank you. My name is Bob Bailey. I'm from Dartmouth, Massachusetts. I am the coordinator of climate change. My two questions are this. Most of what we've talked about so far has been changing the rules. And I would ask, if you change the rules, will people not find ways around those rules? My second question is, I read in a book somewhere that most economists believe that people cannot change. So my question is, do you believe that people can change, or that they can't change and we have to fix the system around the way people are now?
Great last question.
Go for it.
Well, all right. Everybody in the room who has never changed, raise your hand. Of course people change. Of course people change. They change dramatically. On to the other question. Let's take what I was talking about, cap and trade. That's a system of rules. We've done it in this country. We've had 20 or more years of experience with cap and trade system. We used it to reduce acid rain, to reduce smog, to get lead out of gasoline. What we found is that compliance is high. It worked. It worked. Empirically, that's our experience. It worked. People followed the rules. Now, was there anybody who didn't follow the rules? Yes, there always is. But compliance was high, and most people worked within the system.
Jonathan?
So, I'm a lawyer. Rules are the way I was trained to look at society. I got into law because I thought changing the rules was an important and rapid way to change society. I spent a lot of time litigating because I thought that the rules were not being properly applied or complied with, and I think the rules changes we made in the 70s and 80s had a profound impact, a huge improvement in the American environment and conditions we live in. That said, at this point on the issues that concern me most in terms of the way we use resources and what we're doing to the climate, we got to change culture first. I don't think there's any level of rules change that will have sufficient impact unless we're changing the culture. And I don't think we can start with the rules and change the culture through the rules. But I do think we have to change rules. I don't think that human institutions can operate on the basis of what should be without incentives that assure that when they do so, their competitors will also have to do so.
Please join me in thanking Robert Repetto and Jonathan.
Thank you all so much for your presence and for your stories and for your call to us. Thank you. And just a reminder that there will be drumming over at the Marlborough Grad Center led by Fidel Moreno after this. And whether you find yourselves called to go there or to go to the Whetstone Brewery or to gather at pubs or restaurants or anywhere else where it would be good for you to consolate, or whether you go home to get a good night's rest, and that you have a fulfilling and restorative rest of your evening, and it'll be so wonderful to gather here anew tomorrow morning. And remember, at 8 o'clock for continental breakfast and in our seats by 8:25. Thank you all so much for your presence. Have a beautiful day.